So tonight we're going to be talking about Y, Q, and Z and what the problem is, at least from my perspective, in regards to these specific terms when it comes to categorizing things. Kind of, in my mind, this presentation is not really a I'm telling you how it is presentation. This is really more of a I think these need to be discussed. And I'm not sure that there is a necessarily definitive answer that is this is the best way of any conceivable way. This is the way we have to do this. But I'm going to talk about how it was done, how it's being done now. I'm not going way back, but we're going to look a little bit at how it's progressed in the last 10, 15 years or so. And I'm going to talk about how I categorize for my own lodge. And I do think that has been very successful the way I've pushed promoting doing that, at least within North Carolina and within people who collect Lodge 296. I've had a lot of good responses from people. So, but I do kind of want to preface this too with just that, I'm a fairly young collector. I wasn't around when these terms were made up and were used. And I really do want to say, it's easy for me to come in and say, oh, I think there's a problem with this, or I think there's a problem with this. I hope at the end of this there will be some discussion of why these were done quite the way they are. Because when you're coming into something, it's easy to say, oh, well, this isn't quite right. But, I do think there needs to be some credit, or at least, there needs to be some leeway given that this might have been the best thing that could be developed when it was developed originally. So I'm not sure if everybody's really familiar. First, I just want to look at OA insignia, which is, the new OA images. Not to get too much into history and everything, if you come to resources and you look at rules and guidelines, this is the document that's supposed to outline how our cataloging system is essentially done. It's 59 pages long. I don't know if anybody here has read all 59 pages. I have not. I have no desire to. To be quite frank, the way I look at a cataloging system is that you need a clear and concise way of listing items so that new collectors, as well as the experienced collectors, can understand what they want to collect. Okay? 59 pages seems like a lot. If it takes you 59 pages to explain this is how we catalog our patches, just from the top level, I'm questioning why, because no new collector, no new collector who says I want to collect my lodge's OA patches is going to read this. It's never going to happen. I've read year-long scientific studies when I was going through all my work, lab and otherwise, that were less than 59 pages long. I mean, this is just somewhat surprising. But anyway, let's get into the PowerPoint. Y, Q, and Z, what is the problem? First, let's just look at kind of the headers. Headers are not shown on OA images. So they just say, Y, they just say, QZ and so on. And we'll look at how they're shown on OA images, or I'm sorry, OA insignia in a little bit. But on PatchVault, this is how they're shown. They're shown, each letter is shown with a header, and this is how they're described. Y is a prototype or unclear provenance. Q is a lodge reject / unofficial. And Z is a fake or private issue. This is some of my problem right here. Okay. So why? It's a prototype. No, it might be a prototype, or we don't know what it is. Well, wait a minute. If it's a flap, we know that it's an F or an S, which I've debated in the past. But anyway, If it's a round, we know it's an R. I don't like that you have one letter for multiple things. That's confusing. To a new collector, that's confusing. The other part you have with this, especially for Y, and I think it's really especially, I'd say for Y and Z in the other way around. For Ys, what often happens is there's some item and it's been listed as a Y because no one knows what it is. But what has happened is now people say, oh yeah, that's a Y, that's a prototype, it's super valuable. But maybe, maybe, when it was originally listed, unfortunately, maybe there's a descriptor there, maybe there's not. People tend to assume the thing that gives the item more value when they're the one selling it. And when it's listed as a Y, people will tend to assume that it is a prototype and that it's very good compared to we just don't know what it is. And so what kind of value does something we don't know what it is have? So that's some of my issue with that. On the flip of that, for fakes and Zs, so it's a fake or a private issue. Well, what's a private issue? And I know some of you saying, well, Larry, don't be silly. I mean, a private issue, somebody made it up. Fine. So here's a dance team patch that the Lodge dance team advisor made up. Some people are going to say that's a private issue. Some people say, well, he gave them out one per life to the dance team in the 50s and 60s. It's as good as any Lodge issue. That should be, And so you start getting into these things of some Zs might, that's a fake. We don't like that. That's bad. Fine. But then you also get into some items that it's like, well, I don't want to list it as a Z because it's not in the spirit of being a Z, but the Lodge didn't make it. It's not, the Lodge didn't make that item. But it really, I have a hard time listing it as a Z because it doesn't feel that way. So this is the struggle we're having, in that you've got kind of multiple definitions for these letters, which is in essence is saying that they're very broad. They're broadly defined or too broadly defined if you're having multiple definitions for them. And then on the Lodge reject, and we'll look at it in a minute, I actually think it's too narrow. Let's go ahead and get into this, but you'll see when we get to Q, if you look at the Blue Book 5th edition definition of what a Q is, they almost never exist. So it doesn't really, it's really too narrow of a definition. So for Y, and I'm sorry, I'm going to be reading a lot of stuff to you. I hate to do that in a PowerPoint, but we're really looking at the definition of what these terms are and what the issues with those definitions are. So in Blue Book 5th edition, which is the last one I have in print, I don't know if they printed 6th edition. I don't know. But 5th edition is for Y, a broad category of patches and neckerchiefs that for one reason or another do not fit into the main listing. All known prototypes and samples are in this category, okay? Also, patches that cannot be positively confirmed are placed in this category pending further documentation. There are certain patches that are either camp patches, defective patches, which I take to mean like a thread break or something like that, maybe an unmarrowed patch, or other patches that have appeared in previous listings but should not be part of this catalog, which catalog meaning Lodge issues is how I'm taking that. These are also given the Y designation so that when collectors unfamiliar with their story chance upon them, they will be able to make an identification. Okay. Basically kind of what I've already been talking about. Then in this last update, or at least I'm guessing this last update, I don't know if we want to call it Blue Book 6th edition, if that's technically what we're calling it, but this is what's currently listed on OA Insignia, which has tended to be whatever the most up-to-date Blue Book listings are. in that they actually separated out Y. And I don't think anyone ever uses these. One of the ways they separated out Y, they separated Y into 3 letters, one of which is still Y, but one of which is K, which K is known not to be directly issued by the OA lodge or chapter. So these are items known not to be issued of the lodge or chapter, but may be issued by another organization, including in its honor, or may have no connection at all to the OA. These items may contain an indicator indicating that it was used by the lodge or chapter that is misleading. Items issued by a section, such as including all the lodge names and or numbers on a patch for the section conclave, also fall into this category. These items are included in the catalog so collectors know of their existence. I've never seen a section patch listed as a K. I've never seen any patch listed as a K to start with. I've never seen a section patch as it describes they're listed as a K. It gives some other examples. One of them would be, let's say that there's a troop patch from the area and they have the lodge totem on it. They would list that as a K, that it's, at least in concept, that this is an item. We know it wasn't listed by the lodge, but someone might come across it and see this totem and think it's a lodge issue. That's kind of the logic here. And this is going back to the previous definition of Y from 5th edition being too broad. They're trying to separate it out. Then you have U. This is another of the separated out parts of Y, which is unknown or unverified. So they said, okay, can't have too many things in Y. We've got to have unknown or unverified. This I'm pretty okay. I think, if you want to list stuff that you don't know what it is, but you want to list it and you want to have a letter for that, fine. I can get behind that. That's fine. I'm not sure this is how I would do it, but it's not how I do it, but okay. And so U is unknown or unverified. These items appear to be OA issues from the lodge or tied to a lodge/council/camp, but still need provenance or other documentation as to whether or not they were lodge/chapter issues, but for which there is insufficient evidence to determine a permanent code. I will mention, by the way, I would love to see the preponderance of evidence on any number of lodge issues, because I have a feeling that most lodge issues, we don't have any particular evidence. It's like, yeah, that came out from the lodge. Cool. Where's your proof? What proof? I mean, it's 90% of issues we don't, no one has come up with evidence for a lot of stuff that is listed. So anyway, then you have Y, this is the current way it is cataloged on OA insignia, which is special circumstances. They basically took the previous definition and tweaked it a little bit, even though they split out K and U. And it's, a broad category of patches and negatives, which for one reason or another don't fit the main listing. All known prototypes and samples are in this category. Also in this category, so even though they split out K and U, this isn't just prototypes now or samples. It also has other stuff. So once again, we're still in the same problem we were in the 5th edition definition, which is that also in this category are issues where only a few were made and were either issued as awards to a few select individuals and or they were not really readily available to the lodge members. Typical of runs of less than 10 patches fit in this category. If by nature of issue and quantity that were issued really make it conservatively uncollectible, then the patch should warrant the Y listing. The actual number of patches made and or issued and the restriction of how it was issued will be listed in the description field. At the end of the presentation, we're going to kind of circle back to this thought of descriptors, because I do think that is important. But let's just look at this for a second. What this is addressing is they're trying to adapt to the reality that, at least seemingly, there are more lodges today making very small loom runs or production runs of patches, especially some of these issues where it's the scout executive made them up and he made up how many ever. I don't really like that it says less than 10 because, at least for our area, I generally say 25. We're a pretty small lodge. And if we make 25 or less of something, and we're, like I said, we're a small lodge. But if you make less than 25, that's not even enough for the people who want to collect it. I mean, it's just not. And generally, all of the issues that have been made like that go back to the scout executive or to the council and not actually having been approved by the lodge. So the problem here, and it says where only a few were made. Well, what's a few? A few to Okanichi Lodge, they have 2,000 members or more. A few to them might be 50 or 50 to us. Well, that's, depending on what it's for. If it's for something like a NOAC where we sent 6 people, well, 50 was a perfectly reasonable production run. So this is kind of ambiguous. They narrowed the definition by taking out the K and the U, but then they also expanded the definition by including these small production run issues. It's not very clear. And I think all of this is confusing enough to me, let alone to a new collector. And that's how I always look at it. The whole point of having this stuff categorized should be to make it easier to bring in new collectors, to expand on the hobby. That should be our focus. This is too confusing. The way I have listed Ys for my lodge, the only thing I've listed are items that I would consider to be a prototype or a sample, period. That's the only things I put under Y. Some of them, I'm not even sure they should be under Y, but they are considered a prototype or a sample. And there's only 3 of them that our lodge, as far as I'm aware, there's only 3 that our lodge has ever done that I would put there. And I would be fine doing away with Y altogether. And we'll get into that in just a minute. So for Q, this is a little more streamlined. Blue Book 5th edition and OA Insignia, which is essentially, I think, 6th edition Blue Book, is the same. And Q is considered a lodge reject. And this is where I say this is too narrow of a definition when you start thinking about how wide Y is. It says patches that are rejected by the lodge and returned to the manufacturer. Key word there, return to the manufacturer. These are not fake patches. After the lodge rejects the patches, they are sometimes released into the collectorate by the manufacturer. This doesn't happen a lot. It doesn't happen a lot. I think it happened more in the past. Our lodge doesn't have a single patch that would be considered a Q defined as such, where they were returned to the manufacturer and then later distributed by the manufacturer. We don't have an issue like that. I think this is too narrow. There are certainly patches like this out there. But even the lodges that do have a patch like this out there, 1 patch? 2 patches? Maybe? It's just, having a letter for this just, to me, doesn't really make a lot of sense. To have this on its own. What I have done is I have placed a lot under Q. Q has become my catch-all. And it's because I've expanded on, really completely redefined what I consider a lodge reject. And the way I've defined it is essentially patches that are rejected by the collectors of the lodge. The collectors of the lodge have said these are not lodge issues. And so they go under Q. So if it's a prototype, it's super special, there's 1 made, or whatever, it's a Y. Okay, fine. And I'd be fine with throwing them all under here with these and just having one letter for these weird issues, these issues that don't really fit into the regular system. But what I've done is with Qs, it has anything we don't consider a lodge issue. A lot of those include items that were made because, at least in our lodge, if the scout executive made it without consulting the LEC at all, we consider it a Q. And you can have all the discussions you want about Supreme Chief of the Fire, this, that, I don't care. We consider it a Q. The lodge collectors as a whole have decided those issues, this is how we're going to label them. If it's a small quantity that was less than 25 made, and this is kind of going into the discussion of what they added to Y in the 6th edition Blue Book definition, we consider it a Q. Now, there was a patch that the Lodge Scout Executive had made up, and they were given out. It was a Lodge flap and a whole council set as well, but they were given out as gift items to the leadership for one of the jamborees. He made 5 of them. You know, now if you're a very deep collector and you want to have every possible thing that is Lodge related, I think it's great if you want to collect it. But by putting it in as a Q, which is a Lodge reject, which doesn't sound as nice as a prototype, what it has allowed us to do for 296 collecting is it has made people feel good about being able to collect the Lodge and not having to have those items. They don't feel like they have to have these Qs. And I think that's good, because you don't want there to only be 5 people who feel like they can have a complete Lodge collection. I mean, you know, it discourages when you have something like that. That's a modern issue. There's only 5 of them. That's very discouraging to new collectors if they feel that they have to have that. So this has worked very well for us. And I will say, I have put private issues under Q if we consider them a Lodge reject, that they were not produced by the Lodge, but they were not produced in such a way as to make us feel that they are a Z. Okay? A great example happened recently. We had a Lodge member. We were having an auction, and we'd asked people to donate stuff. And he had a little CNC machine. And he made up some wooden flaps. And he gave them to the Lodge. He said, here. And he was so proud that he had come up, and they looked great. And he was so proud that he had come up with those, and he gave them to the Lodge for us to sell to help send the boys to NOAC. The Lodge never approved those. But were they a fake? Were they a Z that was made with the intent to deceive other people out of their money? No. And I don't feel like they should have been listed the same. And so that's where those kind of issues, or maybe you have that questionable dance team patch, or you have that, you know, something else that just doesn't quite fit in the regular Lodge listing, that's where I would put it under Q. Z, I've already touched on this. The 5th edition and the OA insignia definition is the same here. So it just says Z fake. They, for some reason, looked at a thesaurus because they said it was fraudulent, bogus, unauthorized, phony. They misspelled phony, by the way. I thought that was interesting. Spoof and other privately issued insignia. I've narrowed that down to any patch that was created with the intent to deceive, oftentimes for profit. To me, if I'm going to put it as a fake, I feel like it has to have that kind of have that intent that someone made this intentionally to deceive other collectors or for profit or you know, along those lines. That's what makes it a Z to me. I'm not saying it's a Lodge issue if it, you know, if someone makes something up, but there's a lot of issues that just weren't made with that malintent, and those to me are Qs. I want to kind of show you, if just looking here, 296, we're just going to scroll on down, and I'm not updating OA insignia. I update PatchVault, so for anyone who wants to. So, but I just want to come down here and show you. So the way it's laid out in OA Insignia is a little better with the way they have stuff listed, in that you have the definition of the item right here, right? It's right here. You see it on the first page. You don't have to click any farther. Now, some of these we've reissued and such, but I do like that, at least in the way it's laid out. You know, they put here, you know, origin unknown, not authorized by the lodge, possible fake or manufacturer sample. And it's right here on the first page, right? That's good. Now, the problem you get into with PatchVault is for these same issues. Give me a second. There we go. So these same issues, when we come down here, you don't have it. You have to kind of go that one extra step, okay? So you can add in all this wonderful history for the item. I mean, look at this. This is all this wonderful history behind this item. It's all there, but it does rely on somebody actually clicking on it and looking at it. It's not right there next to it. One extra step doesn't sound like a lot, but I sure get enough people asking me about the Q issues to make me realize that people are not clicking on them and reading it. You know, I'll put something up and I'll have immediately, if there was a new Q issue, I'd have immediately 4 or 5 people would reach out to me. What happened with this? Well, it's all right. It's all right in this history section. They just have to read it, but a lot of people just don't click through to it. So the final part of this I'll just kind of mention, and this is something I did, and a lot of these thoughts have come to me as I've been working on our stuff in the last couple years. For the Z's, to me, this is a Larry Lane's perspective. The Z's on the way they were on OA Insignia were a little confusing. They weren't really, and they're not all here now, but it's just one, and they're double listed, and that could be fixed, to be fair. The only thing I have with Z's is that, at least for ours, they were confusing to look at because they were listed and they were listed, and this may just be for our lodge. I haven't actually read the 59 pages or whatever to figure out how they were supposed to be done. I just haven't for Z's. But for our lodge, they were listed in the order they were discovered. Okay? The problem with that is that wasn't necessarily the order they actually came out in. And so I am a fan of, like, the fake of the first flap, make that the first one. You know, make it the first one. And if someone made another fake of the first flap, I would put it here in between. Even if it came out now, I'd have it in the notes when it was issued. But if you're looking at and trying to figure out, okay, I have this patch, is it a real one, is it a fake one, and you're looking at things, if you have them essentially in the order that kind of relates back to the original lodge listing, it's a lot easier for somebody to compare them, right? Like, let's say someone faked our S2 or our S3. Well, that would come here in between the S1, and this is essentially a fake of an S8, kind of. It's a remarrowed patch with a different border color. But so I would put them there. So that way, it's kind of, the fakes are in chronological order in the sense of what they're trying to fake. And I think that just helps people trying to look at these and trying to understand what they have.